From Bathurst to the beach, Supercars are back on track this weekend for the penultimate round of this year's championship, and that championship battle is brewing very nicely, so I'm here to tell you everything you need to know before the cars hit the track on the Gold Coast. Our battleground this weekend is the streets of Surfers Paradise, about an hour south of Brisbane, and this is a classic Aussie street circuit with about 2.9 kilometers of tarmac or 1.8 miles, 15 turns in an anti-clockwise direction, and if the teams were breathing a sigh of relief after a reasonably clean Bathurst, they're going to be holding their breath again because this place is a concrete canyon and I would say the risk rating is still extreme. The lap begins on what we loosely call the main straight, although it has a fair old bend in it, which takes you down to the first proper corner, the opening chicane, which accounts for turns 1 to 3. It gets pretty congested through here, and if you do survive that, you find yourself at turn 4, a near hairpin to the left, the key overtaking location, and it sets you up for the back straight. That back straight is interrupted by one of the most famous sections in Australian motorsport, the beach chicane. This is where we get those great shot of the supercars bouncing up on two wheels from left to right, and after that you're into proper street circuit territory with plenty of 90-degree corners, one at 11, another at 12, another at 13, before you have a pretty uniquely shaped corner actually to finish off the lap through 14 and 15, and before you know it, you've done one tour of the Gold Coast. If you're watching Supercars around here for the first time or are headed trackside and want to know a potential good location to keep an eye on, I've got 3 main spots for you to watch. The first is that opening chicane. I've already mentioned it gets pretty congested down here, and that often means on lap 1 that many cars actually cut this chicane, and that leads to plenty of debate on who should be ahead of who, so that can get quite fun. And then later in the race, actually, there's an awkward pit exit that rejoins right in the middle of this corner, and even late into the race when things look like they've calmed down, suddenly an awkward accident can occur. After that, we get to turn 4. This is a big overtaking location, but because it arrives so soon after that opening chicane, any move into here is normally pretty late and desperate, and that can lead to some awkward little collisions and battles that carry down the back straight, leading us to the final main spot to watch, the beach chicane. This place saw absolute carnage last year with James Golding having a big crash that's actually partly prompted them to remove the tyre bundles from the apexes this year through this section. But here we pretty much always see drama. Even when they last removed the tyre bundles, I think in 2011 we still saw some accidents through here, so definitely don't discount some action in this part of the racetrack. As for the format this weekend, track action gets underway on Friday for Supercars, and we're out of endurance season now, so co-drivers will no longer feature. We'll just see the main game guys, and they'll hit the track at 11:35 a.m. local time on the Friday, followed by practice 2 that afternoon. And the weather could be a curveball on Friday. It's currently forecast to rain at the time of recording, and they're their only real practice sessions because come Saturday, they're straight into qualifying for the first race of the weekend that morning, followed by a top 10 shootout, which is always fantastic around the streets of the Gold Coast. And then, of course, the first race of the weekend, 85 laps around the streets. That starts at 3:45 p.m. Copy and paste that format onto Sunday and tweak the times a little bit because we do it all over again with another qualifying session, top 10 shootout, and another 85 lap race around the streets. The weather gradually improves throughout the weekend. Saturday should be mostly cloudy, but hopefully no rain, and then we should see some sun as well on Sunday. So what have been the key championship headlines since the last event at Bathurst? Well, let's actually start with Bathurst because it came out after the event that SVG could have lost that race. It was discovered that he had an issue just like his teammates with the gear tower. They discovered a crack in that component, and that's pretty much what put Craig Lowndes and Brock Feeney out of the race. So they were lucky to bring that one home. The other big piece of news is Newcastle. The opening race of this year's season will not be there next year at all. It has been cancelled for 2024. It sounds like Bathurst is being lined up as the potential replacement of sprint race like we saw during COVID. So not an ideal situation, but more laps around Bathurst is always a tick in my book. And yeah, Newcastle will be interesting to see how the future of that one unfolds. I'm not feeling overly optimistic about it, but it sounds like by the time some elections take place, maybe it has a chance of coming back in 2025. The Gold Coast tyre bundles, I already mentioned these. These are being removed at the beach chicane. The other component of that is that they're implementing an updated timing loop system to identify when the cars cut the corners through here, which should hopefully negate some of the issues we do see at this part of the racetrack. And some of the key improvements are apparently to the consistency, and they do have a camera system to back it up and make sure that the system's working properly. And the other big component is that it sounds like drivers should get an alert on their dash if they do trigger a corner cut through here immediately. So I think that's a big improvement. If the system works as intended, hopefully this is the way forward. But yeah, a part of me will miss those tyre bundles because I do love the action and the slow-mo shots we get of the cars brushing those. Another thing to keep an eye out on the Gold Coast this weekend is a full course yellow trial. Now this is not going to happen during the racing. It's just going to happen around practice sessions with a view to introduce full course yellows, or virtual safety cars as some people might know them, in 2024. I think they trialed a system earlier this year in Darwin that pretty much bricked Shane Van Gisbergen's car. So fingers crossed that doesn't cause too many technical issues in the machines, especially considering that they don't get too much practice around here. In terms of driver market news, Scott Pye has landed himself a co-drive with Red Bull next year for the Enduros. This is great news for him because it sounds like he's lost himself a full-time drive next year, but a co-drive with Red Bull, you've got to think, is a pretty good plan B. And Pye normally does pretty well around Bathurst as well, so I think it's a big win for AAA as well. Speaking of team changes, Team 18 have pretty much cleaned house. A lot of people have left their team after Bathurst. There was some pretty big errors by the sound of it there, and a lot of people have moved on with some new talent brought in and some open positions that are yet to be filled as well. David Russell did a great job for Erebus this year. He may not be the fastest co-driver out there, but he certainly is consistent, and he's done a great job to get himself a renewal for the Enduros next year with Erebus. Walkinshaw Andretti United have opened a new workshop, moving after a very long time at their old home. And James Courtney, it's not confirmed at the time of recording, but I'm sure it will be by the time this video goes live. He is on the move from Tickford, and it sounds like he's almost certainly going to find himself at the expanded Blanchard Racing team. Let's get on to Gen3 Watch, these new machines and the evolution that they continue to see, because there's been big news this week on both the immediate and long-term future of Gen 3 and how it's going to be set up moving forward. So the first key thing to talk about is that, as suspected, the parity trigger was hit at Bathurst, and for those uninitiated, the parity trigger is essentially an equation that determines, or at least flags, if there might be a disparity between the two cars, because they should be equal in terms of performance. And the Mustang will see some aero changes this weekend, and it sounds like the drivers are fairly happy with that shift. Those who have tested it, it sounds like it's going to bring better balance to the car. It should help a little bit with its drag as well, so we'll see how that unfolds. It must be said that the Gold Coast isn't exactly an aero-dependent circuit, but, you know, any improvement is some sort of improvement. So fingers crossed we're one step closer to an ultimate solution there. Ford have expressed some concerns, however, with the engines. They presented some data to suggest that the Ford powertrain is still at a disadvantage compared to the Camaro, and those updates weren't signed off like the Aero was. So we'll see what happens in that department. Maybe they'll get that tweak for Adelaide after the Aero is being evaluated this weekend. But yeah, the parity wars continue to rumble on. Will this last piece of news, however, finally stop them, or at least dull the parity war down for a little while? Because Supercars have confirmed that during this year's off-season, transient dyno testing and wind tunnel testing will take place, with the wind tunnel testing actually taking place in America, shipping a Mustang and a Camaro over to the States to evaluate them in a far more technological environment than a runaway, in my opinion. And while these tools are fantastic, they're probably not going to be a silver bullet. There's always a degree of art involved, in my opinion, when it comes to parity, but I believe that it's so important, it's a pillar of the sport, that Supercars should make every effort to use the best tools available anywhere in the world to get parity right. So for me, it's a big tick, and fingers crossed it does deliver some updates and a really close competitive championship next year. Turning our attention to this weekend though, and the key storylines to keep in mind, well, the first one is of course the title battle. We're getting to the serious end of things now, and it feels like the championship is really between Brody Kostecki and Shane van Gisbergen at this point. And while Brody has a fairly comfortable lead, it doesn't take much for things to go wrong, either here in Surfers Paradise or indeed at Adelaide in the finale. And it does feel like Shane van Gisbergen has started gaining a bit of momentum over the Erebus team, so we'll see how all that unfolds. We can't forget though that Will Brown and Brock Finney aren't out of mathematical contention, and while it would take something of a stroke of good luck to get those guys back in the championship, once again, it's not out of the realms of possibility around these two street circuits. The other key storyline, of course, on the back of the parity news is, will we see a Mustang resurgence this weekend? And I think this is more than likely, not just because of the parity changes, but because out of all the circuits we've been to this season, it does feel like the street circuits are where the Ford drivers have been able to sort of muscle their cars and still get a fairly decent result. So with the updates to their cars, it'll be interesting to see if any of the Ford drivers can land themselves on the top step. And then my final storyline this weekend is the track itself. Surfers Paradise is a car killer, and there's been a lot of attention on Gen 3 and its durability and how it holds up to the brutality of Australian motorsport. But this weekend, I'm pretty much prepared to give the Gen 3 cars a free pass because Gold Coast destroys cars. It is brutal. The race may not be as long as something like Bathurst, but the curbs and the concrete walls, they take their toll. And even with Gen 2, last year we saw a bunch of mechanical issues with those cars despite them being fairly well developed at that point. So it will be interesting, fingers crossed, that we don't lose too many big title contenders to car issues that are beyond the driver's control. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many of them make the checkered flag through either mechanical issues or indeed accidents, which we so often see around here. Alrighty, let's get to the pointy end of this round preview by getting into some predictions. Now, as always, we'll start with mine, and these are just a bit of fun, don't take them too seriously, and as usual, I'll get into some of your predictions straight after as well. Now, my first prediction is that we will finally get an intense Mustang vs Camaro race for the win. Now, I feel that we as fans are long overdue for this battle. There's been so much fighting in the media and in the paddock, especially around parity, that I am just ready to see a Mustang and a Camaro go head to head on track. I think we're long overdue for that, and I think it would be extra spicy as well. While the parity stuff is far from ideal for anybody, it does mean that there's a fair amount of emotion in the paddock, and I'd love to see that translate to the racetrack. My second prediction is that we will get a red flag in one of the Supercars races, and the sort of two main factors behind that. The first one is the start line. It's a very narrow start line here, and while we don't see opening lap chaos quite like we used to when we had international drivers starting these cars, it still can lead to some chaos. The other key factor is, of course, that we've got plenty of blind and tight corners, and if somebody puts himself in the wall, they can often collect other cars and cause a pile up there as well. So that's why I'm predicting a potential red flag. And my final prediction, I really hope doesn't come true, but despite all this talk of improved timing loop technology this weekend, I still suspect we're going to have some track limits chaos. The last time Supercars removed the tyre bundles and relied purely on timing loops in 2011, they ended up switching it off in the end, I think, during the race because it was just so inaccurate. And while hopefully we don't see scenes that farcical, I do suspect there's going to be plenty of debate and frustration among the drivers purely because they can't feel those corner cuts as such. Whereas a tyre barrier, there's a physical limit they could see and feel as they touch those things on the apexes. Timing loops, they're a lot more intangible, so I'm sure there's going to be some level of debate. Alrighty, now that I've set myself up for embarrassment, let's put some of your predictions out there as well. And the first one here from is FPR is saying he's hoping for a good race. It's been a while, sadly, and this is actually a fairly decent point. The Enduro season was a bit underwhelming, in my opinion. We're about due for an exciting race. I think the last one that really got me fired up was Sydney, the Saturday night race. And obviously the dying laps of that one with plenty of controversy with SVG and Brown, and then AAA and Erebus getting a bit feisty off track as well. So yeah, I'm ready for some serious action this weekend, and fingers crossed we get it. The second prediction is from Petty Theft, who says Grove to be the lead Ford team and challenge for a race win on genuine pace. And yeah, this is interesting. Grove went a bit MIA mid-season, didn't they, with their pace, but they came back strong in the Enduros despite some bad luck at certain points. And yeah, if they continue that form, they could be real contenders this weekend. And let's not forget that Davey Reynolds was on pole around Surfers Paradise last year, so he's certainly no stranger to putting a good lap around here. Then the final prediction from Chris Croft. He's put a few thoughts out there, but the one I really want to dial in on is the last one, saying that not all cars will start Sunday's race. And this is an important point because there's no small accidents around the Gold Coast, and especially for the title contenders, if something goes wrong, it normally goes wrong in a big way around Surfers Paradise. So any mistakes could be punished hugely, and it's one thing to lose out on a good result on Saturday, but if your car isn't ready for the Sunday, well, it could be championship over. Alright, with all that championship talk, let's take a look at the point standing, starting with the Drivers' Championship, and Brody Kostecki does continue to lead the way. As I said, reasonably comfortable, but certainly can't let his foot off the gas because SVG has been closing that gap. Will Brown and Brock Feeney, as we discussed, certainly not out of touch down there in third and fourth, but they will need some good luck to get back in the lead fight. And Chaz Mostert, he could also do a great job really firming up that fifth place this weekend. He's a bit of a street circuit master in my opinion, and should be in for another good result. On the team side of things, Erebus are continuing to lead the way once again. Bathurst worked out in their favour with Brock Feeney encountering some pretty major issues in the Red Bull camp. That means that they're still in second. Brad Jones Racing up there in third. Shell V Power Racing continuing a strong end, or a stronger end to the season, and WAU there in fifth as well. Then finally, we've of course got some support category action, and it feels like we might be one short. I'm not sure how this schedule compares to previous years, but I swear we used to have 4 categories around the streets of Surfers Paradise. Nevertheless, we've got sports sedans, which will sound incredible through the buildings and the concrete canyon. V8 Super Utes, which, let's be honest, will be entertaining, but absolute carnage around the Gold Coast, and Porsche Carrera Cup as well. But with that, that will bring my Surfers Paradise preview to an end. Thank you so much for joining me. This video is going out a bit later than I had hoped as well, so thank you for your patience. Be sure to let me know your thoughts about anything ahead of this weekend down in the comments below. I do read all of them, as with pretty much everything to do with motorsport. It can get quite complicated, so I can't respond to everybody, but I do read every comment and really appreciate it as well. If you enjoyed this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe to be back here for my round review dropping early next week. Until then, enjoy the action. Thank you for your support, and fingers crossed we get some great racing this weekend.